Good evening, afternoon, or morning. Movie Cat is at the microphone. Today I will tell you how harmless flirting can become a dangerous obsession. For your attention, the 1987 thriller Fatal Attraction.
But I'm married.
So what are you doing here?
Dear friends, if you like what I do, please press the thumbs up, write any comment under the video and subscribe if you have not already. 90th, New York, USA. 35-year-old Dan Gallagher spends the evening with his family in their apartments. He is married to the beautiful Beth, who is a little younger than him, and together they play with their 6-year-old daughter. The Gallaghers are happy and talking about the future, so Beth reminds that she has long dreamed of moving to a spacious private house somewhere outside the city, but Dan works a lot and does not have time to consider offers from realtors. Dan is a successful lawyer and staff member of an influential publishing company. At a company party, Dan meets Alex, a pretty woman in her 30s, who recently joined the company as an editor. The conversation does not last long, because Beth is already looking for Dan, so he tells Alex that he must return to his wife. Alex smiles and looks at her new acquaintance. In the morning, Beth and her daughter go to see the old parents out of town for the weekend, where they will also look at the neighbor's house, which is for sale. Dan is not going with them, because today there is a lot of work again, and a business meeting is also planned in the office of the publishing company. During a meeting, Alex smiles and does not take his eyes off Dan, but he does not pay attention, considering it common politeness. It starts to rain, and after the meeting Dan goes outside. Suddenly his umbrella breaks due to the wind. Alex sees this and uses her umbrella to protect Dan from the rain, and in response he offers to wait out the bad weather in his favorite restaurant. Over lunch, Dan tells Alex about the intricacies of his work, and about the strangest case, which he was able to refuse only by cunning, because Dan was asked by his own mother to be a lawyer in her divorce from his father. When Alex finds out that Dan's wife has gone out of town, she calls him a cheater because he spends time in a restaurant with an unfamiliar woman, but Dan does not consider this a crime. Alex says that they are adults and know how to keep secrets, so apparently there is nothing wrong with continuing the evening. After leaving the restaurant, Dan goes with Alex to her house and they make love, and after that she suggests they go dancing. Dan agrees, and at the disco they have fun until late at night. Later, Dan sees Alex off, but she doesn't want to end the date and pulls him into the elevator, which she stops between floors to make love again. Early in the morning, Dan leaves for his home. Beth calls him and tells that the viewing of the house for sale has been postponed until the evening, so she will stay with her parents for a while longer. After finishing the call, Dan immediately hears the next one. He is surprised, because on the other end is Alex, who has already found out his home number and is calling to ask why she woke up alone. Alex planned to spend today with Dan, so she asks him to come back, and he replies that he needs to work and also walk the dog. Persistent Alex invites Dan to come to her place with the dog and take a walk together. Having met, Alex and Dan have fun in the park, throwing a ball to the dog, and then go to lunch. Alex turns on the music and Dan hears one of his favorite operas, Madame Butterfly. Alex says that this is her favorite music also, and now she is sure that she and Dan are kindred spirits. In the evening, Dan is getting ready to go home, and Alex doesn't like it, because she knows Beth will only be in town tomorrow. Dan is attracted to Alex, but he reminds her that he is married, and for him it makes no difference whether he leaves now or in the morning, because it will happen anyway. Suddenly Alex becomes furious because she doesn't want to be a one-night stand, so she scolds Dan and kicks him out of the room. A minute later, she demands that he say goodbye to her properly. While hugging Alex before he's leaving, Dan discovers cuts on her wrists and is horrified. He provides first aid, stopping the bleeding, and still stays with Alex, because she doesn't feel well and it's not clear what other thoughts will come to her mind. In the morning, Dan leaves for work. Later, Beth returns with her daughter and Dan spends the evening with them, asking how the weekend was and how they like the country house. Beth is impressed by the beautiful rooms and spacious territory, so she invites Dan to see it all in person. In the morning, they leave the city together and inspect that same house. Then an impressed Dan says that he is ready to buy it. Returning to the office, he sees Alex in the reception area and invites her into the office. Alex apologizes for her behavior yesterday and offers, as a sign of reconciliation, to go to the opera together to see their favorite Madame Butterfly, but Dan refuses because restoring a relationship that should not exist makes no sense. In the evening, Dan is having fun with his friends at the bowling alley while Alex feels rejected and sits at home alone, and the tickets she bought are simply wasted. Over the next few days, Alex constantly calls Dan at his office and tries to force her company on him, but this annoys Dan, and in the end, instead of the usual polite excuses, he directly says that he is married and does not want to see Alex anymore. He then instructs the secretary to answer all future calls from this number that Dan is not in the office. A few days later, at 2 a.m., Dan is awakened by the loud ringing of his home phone. He picks up the phone and hears Alex, who wants to see him urgently in the morning. Having met her on the subway, Dan is furious and demands to leave him alone. But Alex has managed to fall in love with him and now she won't just back down. In her opinion, if Dan ended up at her house, then it means that not everything is ideal in his family life. Dan advises Alex to see a psychiatrist, because then in the restaurant she said that she knows how to keep secrets and did not warn that she has problems with logic and psyche. Alex initially knew that Dan was married, which meant that 2 days of fun together were doomed to end. Suddenly, Alex reveals that she is pregnant, shocking Dan. He offers to help with the abortion and pay for everything, but Alex is not going to give up the child, because she is already 36 and perhaps this is her last opportunity to get pregnant. Dan suspects Alex of promiscuity and tries to dissuade her from giving birth, but it is all to no avail. At home, Dan begins to fear for his family and places an advertisement for the sale of the apartment. The next morning, Alex leaves for work, which is what Dan expects for. Lurking himself nearby, he breaks into her apartment and looks for any evidence that proves Alex's polygamy or her bluff, but finds only a pregnancy test and a gynecologist's number. In the evening, Alex calls Gallagher's at home again, but to no avail, because Dan has already changed their phone number. A few days later, Dan returns home after another day at work, and from the hallway he hears a female, familiar voice. He enters the living room and sees Alex having a nice conversation with Beth about buying the Gallagher's apartment. Dan is very angry with Alex, but holds back so that Beth doesn't find out the truth. As he leaves, Alex writes down a new phone number and promises to call back. In the evening, Dan arrives at Alex's house and shouts at her to leave his family alone. Alex declares that she wants to be a part of his life and they will have a child together, but Dan reminds that Alex herself decided to give birth and this should be her personal matter. He believes that Alex is mentally ill and her threats to tell Beth everything infuriate Dan. He warns that he will kill Alex if she destroys his family. Gallagher's move into the country house they bought, renovate it, and a few days later Dan discovers that someone poured caustic acid on his car and damaged the wiring. Dan buys another car and drives home in the evening with a gift for his daughter, a cute rabbit. Alex follows Dan and thus finds out the address of the Gallagher's new home. And watching the new family member gives birth to a new idea in Alex's head. In the morning, Dan arrives at the police station and tells the officer that Alex is insane and some action needs to be taken. However, the police are powerless because until Alex has committed a crime, she is not a criminal, and at the moment Dan has no evidence against her. In other words, when you will be killed, then come. Later, Beth walks into the kitchen and discovers a rabbit boiling in a pot, which make her and her daughter shocked. In the evening, Beth asks why Dan hasn't called the police yet, because this is an invasion of private property and sabotage. Dan knows who did it and invites Beth to listen to him. He admits that he cheated on her with Alex, the same blonde who came to buy their apartment, and asks to forgive him for this mistake. Beth is confused and upset, but she holds back her emotions and tries to understand how this all relates to the rabbit in the pan. Dan says that Alex is pregnant with his child, which makes Beth furious and she yells at her husband, and then they decide to call Alex themselves. Beth promises over the phone to kill Alex if she gets close to their family again. After the conversation, Dan packs his suitcase and moves back to New York, probably to give Beth time to calm down and come to her senses. A few days later, she arrives at the kindergarten to pick up her daughter. However, the girl has already been taken away by a woman who introduced herself as her mother. Frightened, Beth returns to the car and rushes home at high speed. while looking around for her daughter. Suddenly, Beth crashes into a car and ends up in the hospital. At the same time, Alex takes the kidnapped child on a roller coaster ride at an amusement park, and in the evening she returns the girl home. At the hospital, Dan visits Beth and sees her in an almost unconscious condition. He kisses her, holding back his tears, and understands his guilt, and then, filled with anger, he goes to New York to Alex's house. Dan understands that he again has no evidence against her, and inflicting severe injuries on her will most likely not improve the situation, but he still cannot restrain himself. Dan breaks into Alex's apartment and strangles her, but stops in time to avoid becoming a murderer. Alex comes to her senses, takes a knife, and attacks Dan, but he disarms her, holding the knife in his hand. Dan does not give in to anger and leaves it near the stove, after which he slowly walks away. And all this time Alex looks after him and smiles. Dan goes to the police again, but the officer still cannot help, because Alex did nothing wrong with the girl, and women are not arrested for walking in an amusement park. Dan returns to the country house to take care of his daughter. In the evening, Beth returns home from the hospital and draws herself a bath. Her injured arm still hurts, so Dan goes down to the kitchen to get some medicine and some hot tea. Beth looks in the mirror and is horrified as Alex enters the bathroom, armed with a knife. She asks what Beth is doing here, because Alex considers Dan and the new house to be her new life. While searching for medicine, Dan cannot hear the conversations on the second floor. Stabbing the homewrecker, Alex is indignant at why Beth is resisting her husband's new passion. According to Alex, she and Dan have a mutual attraction, and Beth has no right to meddle in their personal affairs. Alex swings her knife for the final blow, but Beth dodges and starts screaming. Dan appears in the bathroom, disarms Alex and drowns her in the bath, while Beth runs away to call the police. Alex stops breathing and then suddenly stands up and swings a knife at Dan. Suddenly, Beth shoots Alex from behind and kills her, putting an end to her husband's brief infatuation. The police arrive and register the case as an act of self-defense. Later, escorting the police to the exit, Gallaghers hug each other and start to establish their family life, in which Dan will now think seriously every time before flirting with unfamiliar women. Thank you for watching. I'm currently looking for your favorite genre, so if you enjoyed this retelling of the intense erotic thriller, Fatal Attraction, please write about it in the comments. This will help me select similar films for future retellings.